My parents stole my inheritance from my golden sister's business plan, but I exposed them at a party and now everyone's blaming me for speaking the truth. I, 17 female, recently had an incident with my parents, where they decided to give my share of the inheritance money for college, which my grandma left me before passing away, to my golden elder sister because they wanted her to start a business after not getting into her dream college for the second consecutive year. I was only close to my grandmother and my family, and my parents trying to steal what she had given me due to their favoritism didn't sit right with me. So I decided to plan my revenge by exposing their hypocrisy in front of everyone, but now I'm being called names for it. I'll begin with my dynamic with my grandma and my family. I was born into a well-to-do family, which consisted of my parents, my grandma, and my older sister, Alice, 19 female. My parents, although doing extremely well financially, never failed to remind us of their hardships since we were immigrants. Almost every conversation at our dinner table was about this, and as a 10-year-old, that didn't make much sense to me and was tormenting. There were times when I deliberately loaded up on snacks and skipped dinner just to avoid this conversation or rather lecture. I tried to talk to my sister about this, in order to maybe bond over it, but she always shrugged me off, asking me to mind my own business. The only one in the family who shared my sentiment back then was my grandmother. She was a rather cool granny, allowing us to have snacks, making our favorite dishes, and even taking the wrath of my parents if Alice or I did anything wrong. Alice never liked me, didn't acknowledge my existence at school, and bullied me into doing her chores at home, with my parents not doing anything about it, so it was safe to say it was just me and Grandma in my little world. Things were going well for me until the beginning of high school. Alice, being older, was about to complete hers and had started eyeing a few colleges. My grandma, on the other hand, was getting sicker with each passing day. My parents tried everything to make things better, but they only got worse, which ended up with Grandma being hospitalized. I was not able to focus on anything as my only support system was now in danger. My grandma got better soon, but the doctors said we needed someone to take care of her at all times. I immediately offered to do that, but my parents asked me to stay out of it. Although they earned well enough, they couldn't afford a private nurse, so they decided to put Grandma in a senior home. I was heartbroken by this and did everything in my power, from pleading to throwing tantrums, to get my parents to change this decision, but nothing helped. Ultimately, my grandma talked to me and said that the only way she'd be okay was by not being a burden to me or my parents anymore. We both shed a few tears as I packed her stuff from our house. My parents looked oddly relieved after dropping my grandma off. I was absolutely done with them and decided to not engage with anyone at home anymore. I visited Grandma every day and stayed out most of the time, hanging out either at my friends' houses or studying at the library, finishing my dinner, and going to bed before my parents came back from work. It was made clear to me on various occasions that Alice was the golden child and I should be looking up to her, chatter which I obviously ignored. The next year was particularly hard for all of us. My grandma was getting sicker at the senior home, my mom was fired from her job, and Alice, well, she fell into the bad company of her peers and totally derailed from academics or even co-curriculars, making it hard for her to get into even a half-decent college. I, on the other hand, was thriving. My frequent visits to the library and a good peer support group paid off, and I ended up doing pretty well academically. I had selected my dream college and was sure that I was going to get in the next year. My mom, trying to be productive at home, made Alice her new project and started taking care of her academics and basically her whole life. Alice was not liking this controlling behavior, so loud screaming noises from our house were now common. Since one source of income was reduced, my parents decided it was best to bring Grandma back home as they couldn't afford the senior home anymore. No one could have been happier than me hearing this. We brought Grandma home the next day, but the ambience of our house didn't sit well with her. She got extremely sick one night, and I decided to take care of her. That night, I saw a different side of her. She wasn't just my granny but also her own person, and she had achieved a lot more than what I expected. She fell asleep telling me her tales from her time and gave me her gold necklace for being such a wonderful human. The next day, my father told us that she had passed away in her sleep. A wake was organized for her a few days after her death. I was in absolute shambles, and her passing did take a toll on me, as I fell ill during that time too. My mother took care of me for a while, and then I was left on my own. I gathered whatever energy I had in me to attend her wake and made sure to wear the necklace she gave me. I was standing next to Alice at the church, who fake cried at every opportunity she got, portraying herself as holier than thou. I quietly attended to everyone but was done standing once Alice whispered to me that she was glad Grandma was gone. As I was about to excuse myself, I was suddenly pulled back by Alice. She tightly held my wrist and asked me where I got the necklace I was wearing. I did not want to tell her, so I asked her to mind her own business and leave me alone. She ignored what I said and pulled the necklace in an attempt to take it. My dad saw this and asked us both to step out. He asked why we were creating a scene, and Alice immediately said that I had a necklace on which she didn't get. My dad took one look at it and realized it was his mother's. But instead of defending me, he started inquiring if I had stolen that necklace from my grandmother. I was already unwell, and this shocked me even more. Irritated, I replied that she had given it to me before passing away and that he had no right to call me a thief without any proof. Alice interrupted and said she should get the necklace because she was the elder one. My dad turned to me and asked me to return the necklace to him. I couldn't believe he was serious and asked him to repeat himself, to which he replied that he didn't have the whole day to argue with me and I should return it to him immediately. There was no way I was going to give my grandma's last possession to him, so I angrily said no. At this point, people had started to look at us. My dad, in a very hushed but stern tone, told me to either give him the necklace or leave the wake. I chose the latter and walked back home right then. Once they reached home from the wake, a screaming match ensued between me and the rest of my family. They called me names, assassinated my character, and went as far as to say that they wished I wasn't born. It hurt a lot, but I fought for myself and made it very clear that I was eagerly waiting for the day to leave their house and them forever. Since that day, I cut off all contact with my family. I got a part-time job and started paying for my share of the groceries and the rent. Although we lived under the same roof, it felt like I was renting a room in their house. Not being involved with them agreed with me, as I got back on track pretty quickly. Alice, on other hand, even with my mother's help, wasn't able to score well and decided to take a gap year to travel and try again next year for her preferred university. I was surprised that my parents agreed to this because it seemed like they had been short on money for the last few months. One night, as I was going to the kitchen to get some water, I secretly heard my parents talk about the college funds my grandma had left for both me and Alice, which were in their possession until we turned 18. This college fund was being used as Alice's travel money for the gap year. I was glad I overheard this because there was a chance I wouldn't have received it at all. Being free from the financial burden of college gave me a lot of space to improve even further on my academics and co-curriculars, which I did. I was also selected as valedictorian for my graduation. My parents did show up at the graduation and acted like I was their golden child in front of everyone. I put on a mask and pretended with them for the day. The next week, I got an email from my preferred university stating that I had been accepted as a student to the course I desired. I had a long cry in my room for an hour before I went down to tell my parents about it. As soon as I reached downstairs, I saw that Alice was back from her voyage and was crying. All I had heard about her when she was away was that she had gotten into illegal substances and was also facing some mental issues. Seeing everyone so stressed, I realized something bad had happened, but I decided to tell them about my acceptance letter first. As soon as I was about to speak, my dad stopped me and asked me to read the room before I said anything. I asked him what was going on, and he told me that Alice had been rejected from her preferred university this year as well. I thought it wouldn't be okay to brag about my accomplishment at that point, so I went back to my room. A week passed, and I had to submit the fee to confirm my admission, so I decided to go and talk to my parents about the college fund Grandma left me. They asked me to sit down once they heard about the college fund. They congratulated me on getting into my university of choice but didn't know what fund I was talking about. I said I heard them one night talking about it, and if they were going to lie so blatantly, I might as well seek the help of a lawyer to get my inheritance. They were taken by surprise at this and told me that they had a good reason for not telling me about the college fund. They said that since Alice was the golden child, they expected her to get in this year and hence had spent her college fund on her recreational activities. They didn't expect much from me and didn't think I would need a college fund, but now that Alice was again not selected for college, they were planning to gift her a place and funds to start her new business from my college fund. It was unbelievable how biased my parents were acting toward my sister. I hadn't felt that alone in a very long time, as I did at that moment. They could see how disappointed I was in them, and to cover their guilt, they suggested that since I was a good student, I could easily get in on a scholarship if I tried. I still couldn't believe their audacity, but I very calmly asked them to think about it again and went back to my room. Before I could open the door to my room, I could hear Alice coming towards me. I turned around and asked what she wanted. She was clearly high and began screaming at me about why I was trying to steal her money. I told her that it wasn't her money and that maybe she should live in the real world a little more. She got extremely pissed at that and pushed me against the wall. Hearing the thud, my parents came running to find me resisting Alice's attempt to hurt me. My father pulled Alice back, whereas my mother asked me if I was okay. As soon as I got up, they both took Alice to her room to talk to her and left me in the hallway, with no first aid or anything. I got myself up somehow and decided to go stay at a friend's house for a safe space. The next morning, I went back home and asked my parents if they had made a final decision. They said they had, and nothing had changed since the last time we talked, and now they were more sure about giving Alice the money because she needed it more. Instead, now they had decided to throw Alice and me a joint party, for my graduation and her new business, basically a way for her to build connections. I didn't expect anything better from them, but I had a plan in mind to make this party unforgettable. I told my parents I was okay with their plan and would like to contribute by making a business introduction video for Alice. The very next moment, I found myself in Alice's room, asking her what her plan for this new business was. Her incompetence was visible in the way she described it, but I somehow made it bearable for a presentation, which she approved of. There was no thank you from her, obviously, just congratulations for making myself of some use. A week later, it was time for the big video at the party. My dad had gotten big screens and everything. A few people congratulated me on my admission, but my dad interrupted and asked everyone to pay attention to the big screen, gesturing at me to play the video. The video began with a nice message about Alice and then played the video of her talking about her new business, which made it very clear how sure she was of the whole plan. Then it led to a video in which I was talking to everyone, explaining how my family had been biased towards me, spending my college fund on Alice's business, which she had no idea about. On seeing this, my dad ran towards the controls of the projector to stop it, but I stood in between, letting the video play the audio recording I had secretly taped of my parents' reasons for stealing my inheritance. In the end, I called my family a bunch of entitled thieves, and the screen went blank. Everyone was now looking at me, my father, and my sister. Alice immediately started to cry, with my mother escorting her inside the house. My dad stood there silently until everyone realized the awkwardness of the situation and left. I couldn't have been prouder of myself and went back to my room to pack my bags. I had no plans of staying with them anymore. Before I could leave, I got a call from my cousin, telling me how my father had made a Facebook post on my wall, manipulating the whole situation and calling me the reason for his mother's death. My phone was bombarded with constant messages from all my old relatives, calling me an unchecked rebellious child, and this has me reconsidering if I went too far with Alice's big reveal at the party. So, am I the a-hole for revealing the truth about my family of how they stole my college funds from my entitled sister? Update 1. I read the comments and appreciate the advice. Here are some questions I'd like to answer before going ahead. I am currently 17 years old and will be turning 18 in 2 months when I can have direct access to the inheritance my grandma left me. A lot of you mentioned how I could contact CPS for the neglect I faced from my parents. The thing is, I don't wish to because the only way they've been absent is emotionally. For the most part, other than this college fund, it was my parents who provided for me until I was ready to earn on my own, which was also not forced upon me. They might not have been very good parents to me, but I still believe that they're not evil. Regarding them being blind to Alice's behavior. Alice has always pretended to be the perfect child. It was only Grandma and I who knew her true side, but in front of everyone else, she has been an absolute angel, until now, whereas I have been the one who speaks for herself, so it makes sense why they would prefer her word over mine, which I am not justifying at all, but I wish things were different. A lot of you asked about what exactly was in the Facebook post that triggered so many of my relatives, so here we go. The Facebook post began with my father apologizing for whatever happened at the party. He continued by describing his struggle to raise me and the payback he had gotten. He said that I was always an ungrateful child, literally citing incidents from when I was 4 years old, and couldn't even let go of humiliating him at his mother's wake. He said that I manipulated my grandma with my charm, leading to her being reckless in her health habits with me, which eventually became the cause of her death. He said he had no ill intentions of stealing the inheritance from me but thought he could help his daughter who was in actual need of the money at that moment, and that I would have easily gotten a scholarship. He said he trusted me to understand the situation, but instead, I decided to put on a show making him the villain. I know, the post sounds like a very well-crafted sob story, which it was, and it was able to convince a lot of my relatives to try and bring me to the right path by calling me names and giving lectures. It's funny how he omitted everything about his mother being thrown into a senior home and his frequent baseless accusations against me, but I decided to not respond to him in his way. After getting my head in the right space, I left my house, with my father hurling abuses at me for ruining the family name and my sister screaming at the top of her lungs like a toddler on seeing me. I have considered the suggestion of consulting a lawyer with my maternal aunt, who is the only one supporting me through this rift with my family. Update 2, I am writing this update 2 weeks after the last one. I called the university admissions board, explained to them my situation, and asked them if I could apply for a scholarship until this was settled. Due to my excellent record so far, they've approved my scholarship, and I will be moving to another city to attend college by the end of this month. 2 days after I left home, I saw a missed call from Alice. I called back thinking it must be some emergency because she never calls me. She picked up the second time and asked if we both could talk in private somewhere away from home. I said I'd think about it and text her. I thought, what could be the harm in meeting her? So we decided to meet at a cafe behind our school at 5. I reached and saw her sitting with a few friends. I waved my hand at her, and she asked me to join their table. I was a bit surprised, thinking it was supposed to be private, but I asked her why she wanted to see me. She asked if I could give her my inheritance willingly in exchange for something. I asked her to be clear, and she slid the papers to our house, signed by our parents. As soon as I realized what they were, I gave them back to her and inquired about how she got them signed. She said the day I left, both my parents got drunk to handle the pressure, and that's when she got them signed. I quickly took a picture and asked her to think of the consequences for all of us since this wasn't just wrong but illegal. She called me a bad word for a coward, which was followed by her friends calling me names as well. I got up and left. I went back to my aunt's house and told her everything. She suggested we take action quickly for this to not go out of hand. Also, by then, I had been getting a lot of unnecessary calls redirected from my dad's Facebook post, so I decided to change my number altogether. The very next day, we went to a lawyer and explained the whole situation, including the house papers my sister had possession of. He suggested that we should consider settling it out of court since I was about to turn 18 and would have control of the inheritance anyway. I called my father right then and asked him to show me Grandma's will. At first, he denied it, but he quickly changed his tone when I mentioned the legal route. He said he was ready to settle it out of court and would contact my lawyer as soon as he got in touch with his. I agreed and cut the call. Update 3, I am writing this update the morning after meeting my family again. So, my father's lawyer contacted my lawyer and set a date to meet at their office. As soon as I reached the office with my aunt, I could see my parents sitting, making disappointed faces at me, with my sister sitting quietly and honestly looking scared because she knew I was about to reveal her secret. This was when I got to read the will for the first time, and it said that the money Grandma was leaving me and Alice could be used by our parents only for our necessities if it came to that, and if not, it would be transferred in full to us on our 18th birthdays. I realized there was no way for my parents to get my college fund for my sister, and I asked them how they were planning to do so. They said they would have taken a NOC for me in writing to transfer my funds to my sister because I didn't need them. I felt so bad for myself that I started to cry. My aunt calmed me down and asked me to focus on what was going on. It was settled that I was going to get the money from the inheritance next month. I could see my parents didn't care about me at all, but I still wanted to do right by them, so I showed them the pictures of the house papers Alice had offered me the other day. They were confused at first, but their emotions quickly changed to anger when they heard what Alice had done. They left with her immediately, and I was given a copy of Grandma's will to read in full. My aunt took me to get ice cream as a celebration of my win, and it was the first time in a very long time that I felt this free. That night, while reading the will, I realized my grandma had left some money for charity, which my parents had sole access to, and the amount in my inheritance and college fund was way more than my entire course fee, almost 3 times. She had also left me a box kept in her bed, and she wanted me to take care of it. I remembered Grandma and her stories about her young adventures, and how she had actually worked really hard to earn, which was going to help me, her second generation. Update 4, this will be the last update since the situation is now completely under control. A lot went down at my house. I got to know about it from a neighbor I was in touch with, who got to know it from my mother. As soon as my parents reached home with Alice, they sat her down and gave her an earful for about 2 hours regarding what a disappointment she had been and how, if they had trusted me more instead of her, they would have had a child who wasn't an absolute waste. My sister was not going to listen to this and argued with them that if they looked at me and her like their children and not as projects, maybe we would have turned out to be better adults. My father asked her to not drag my name through the mud with hers and asked her to give him the papers for the house immediately. She got quiet and didn't utter a word, even after repeated questioning. They finally decided to call the cops on Alice. She didn't say anything at the police station either until she was made aware of the charges she'd face for scamming her parents. She immediately told them that she had sold them to some guy she knew for alcohol. They took her to the guy's place, which was a grocery store, and he had kept the papers safe with him since he thought it was bizarre that someone would give their property papers for a $40 bottle of alcohol and felt something was fishy. As soon as my father got the papers back, he decided to not press charges against Alice and took her back home. The next day, I got a call from my father, asking me to come home since they wished to talk to me. His voice sounded gentle, so my aunt gave me the go-ahead to actually meet them. When I reached home, my mother started to cry and hugged me, with my father waiting in the living room. They both apologized to me profusely for whatever had gone down in the last few years and expressed their wish to rebuild our relationship from scratch if I wished to do that. I agreed and decided to reconnect with them before moving to college. I asked about Alice. They told me that she had been admitted to rehab for her addiction and wouldn't be back until the next summer. My dad also deleted his Facebook post and instead posted another one apologizing to me for whatever had happened. I told him there was no need for it, but he insisted, so I didn't say much. I didn't get any apology calls from people who were bashing me before, and I happily let it go. I also went to Grandma's room and got the box mentioned in the will. On opening it, I realized it was a stack of notes from Grandma's youth until her death, describing her life journey. I read those that night and cried remembering her. The next day, I asked my parents what they were planning to do with Grandma's charity money. They said they had no plans for it, but I suggested giving it to a group of service homes because that's where Grandma got a second life. They both agreed that this was indeed the best use of the money, and we donated it the next day. I also told them about the notes Grandma had left and how touching they were. I suggested that since Alice had nothing much going on for her, she could take those notes and publish them into an autobiography of sorts with the help of my parents. They were overjoyed at this and assured me that they'd talk to her about it once she came back. I made the decision that once I got the inheritance from Grandma, I would give some portion of it to my aunt, who was my rock during all this chaos, and some of it to my parents, in the spirit of building a new relationship and for them to use it for Alice's future. I also got to see Alice on my way to college. I could see the change in her as she was looking healthier and happier and was surprisingly more welcoming to me. We talked a lot about our childhood, and she apologized, but I told her it was all water under the bridge and that the main concern right now was for her to get better. Before leaving, I told her about publishing Grandma's autobiography, and she said she was looking forward to it. She then bid me farewell, and I finally left for college, looking ahead in life and keeping my grandma with me in the gold necklace she gave me on her last night.